Public comment on non-agenda. There you are. You snuck in on me. So, Mr. Shaganaga, it is all yours.
Okay, is the agenda first or non-agenda
This
first?
is non-agenda.
So not,
Public comment on non-agenda. It says I call to order non-agenda.
so non-agenda first.
Non-agenda first.
Okay. So non-agenda is today is this is a public this is a budget committee, and then I actually very concerned specifically about one budget, which is the police budget. Right now, I'm not sure if everybody are aware. I actually called the police on Monday, which is the first day of school. First of all, without saying anything else, it takes approximately 30 minutes for an officer to respond. And then when I had approximately 20 minutes conversation regarding with that police officer, I actually learned something horrifying to me. I mean, for you guys, maybe you don't really care too much. You only hear one day a month, so maybe it doesn't bother you. But I am here every day, so I'm actually very scared. The officer told me there's only 2 patrol officers on Monday. Well, possibly right now, I'm assuming from Monday to now, there's no officer are being hired. So assuming that there's only 2 officers, our campus, I don't know, our student, employee, faculty member combined together, I'm assuming that's 20,000 something people. And then I don't know, is that the budget is the issue, or is that whatever the politically correct woke is the issue? I don't really understand how. Just ask anybody on the street, how is that possible for 2 officers protecting the life, liberty, and then safety for 20,000 human beings in this campus? So that's the part that I feel really makes no sense to me. And then while I deep a little bit deeper again, I check out actually on the Google and everything. I actually learned that all of those officers we had several years ago, they end up in San Marino Police Department. Right now, very recently, they end up in the 2 of them. PCC officer end up in San Gabriel Police Department. So I feels like everybody are using PCC as a transfer bridge. They know they will have no future in PCC Police Department. They know they are not allowed to carry firearm, which is they are entitled to under the peace officer certificate, which is they earned that from the academy. They know that with the department with only 2 officers, they have no way to getting a promotion. I feel that they know that they don't have any future in the PCC Police Department. Therefore, they after they get 1, 2, 3 years of experience, they immediately move to San Marino, Arcadia, and then right now with the San Gabriel Police Department. So right now I feel, I don't know if the budget is the issue or whatever is the issue. There's only 2 officers in the current police department. That's just very, very scary. You know, whenever using the example on Monday, that was a non-life-threatening emergency. But I'm just scared that what happened if it is a very, very life-threatening emergency. That officer actually told me something very, very. Cool.
Okay, thank you. Approval of minutes, July 11th.
So moved.
Second. Discussion? In favor?
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Okay, the reason we are here, adopted budget 23-24.
Is there a public comment on a specific?
Oh, I think there is. Thank you. And I turn it over to you for public comment.
Cool.
Thank you.
So
I'll reset again and then just let you know when.
Cool, perfect. So again, as far as I know, is that the deadline to adopt the budget is September 15th. So I'm not really sure if there's any change regarding the police budget or regarding the public safety budget. So right now, it is number one, it is a budget issue regarding the police officer. Right now, literally, there's no morale. So when I talked to the police officer, they actually told me something very, again, it's very, very, I don't even have a word to describe that. They said that 3 weeks ago, which is, as a student, I was never notified regarding one event, but I'm assuming about all the faculties, they actually, every one of you guys should know something, that 3 weeks ago, there's a homeless man with a gun that was occurred in PCC locker room that was arrested by the PCC police officer. So all the faculty knows that information, but I don't understand why the students never knows that. When I talked to that officer regarding that issue, that officer actually told me that we just got lucky on that day. That officer told me, you know, my career, my life could end on that day. That officer said that this has been for being this for 10, 20, 15 years. You know, our police union, maybe it's, our budget is too small. There's literally, you know, is a useless, pointless union, which is no power, nobody in it, literally. And then regarding that, they were actually talking about, thinking about that. What happened if, you know, using the President Jones as an example, what happened if PCC, you know, hire President Jones as a president and then telling her, hey, you are not allowed to use a computer. It's the same thing that you hire a professor and then telling them, hey, you are not allowed to use a textbook. And right now we are doing this to the police officer, that we are hiring a police officer and you are telling them, hey, you are not allowed to carry a firearm. So literally, I'm concerned about their own safety, I'm concerned about my safety, I'm concerned about everybody else on campus, the safety, especially that you know, we know that there's a homeless man with a gun 3 weeks ago ended up in the arrest. So I would make sure that my recommendation would be something, whatever, how many buildings we have. For example, we have one designated officer, budgeted officer in C building, another one officer in D building, one officer in library, one officer in C building, something like that. So that means whenever, you know, each officer is in charge of a building, whenever in that building, you know, somebody calls for help, that officer can respond within 1 or 2 minutes. Maximum. And then when the officer dealing with a man with a gun, when the officer dealing with a man with a knife, when the officer was dealing with a bomb, you know, active bomb, active shooter threat, they have to have their firearm to respond. Otherwise, I don't know how long you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I actually appreciate that.
Thank you.
I think this way.
Thank you.
Okay, administrative presentation.
All right, so we're gonna pull up the slides. I'll just let you know when to change them. All right, let's jump in. We've got our proposed adopted budget for 23-24. Next slide. It's okay, that's okay. They have copies. So just as a quick reminder, our tentative budget assumptions are consistent with what we've projected for our adopted budget projections. So as an overview, we get the information from the state, the governor's office in January, we go through May revise, and then a bunch of trailer bills after the enacted budget is signed in June. And so our current projections for adopted are consistent with what has been previously presented at the board. What it includes, though, is that 8.22% COLA for apportionment revenue. Remember that COLA is applied to the full apportionment number, as well as a 2.2926% apportionment deficit factor. So let's think about the deficit factor. I guess we like to sort of think about that in a way that the Chancellor's Office has used that number to help adjust what colleges receive if the revenues don't necessarily make the amount that's been projected. So think about that deficit factor for 8.22% COLA. It essentially means that then PCC received basically 5.9%.
Oh, that's a negative number?
It is a deficit factor, yes, that's introduced. And the Chancellor's Office uses it regularly. We're going to talk a little bit more about the EPA Act, but they use it regularly because it is possible for a college to have success matrix numbers to earn a greater apportionment allocation than what the state has money for, right? So we could technically, all of our, the student success formula, so our FTES, our supplemental data, so our Pell recipients, our numbers to transfer, they could just blossom. They could just explode, and yet the state may not have all of the funding to pay all of the community colleges what they earn, and so they use that deficit factor to manage the revenue stream.
In my 3.5 years, I've never seen that number. I've never seen it.
We don't normally talk about the deficit factor other than to say that it's been reintroduced. I mean, we had a pretty low deficit factor last year. We had a pretty large deficit factor on EPA that we'll talk about in shortly. But it's been lower because the state revenues have exploded in the last 3 years, and now the state is starting to see the revenues sort of constrict. And so one of the key pieces is that tax filing deadline, has changed. We'll talk about that as it relates to EPA. And so what they're doing is they're projecting the educational protection account, which is written into the California Constitution. So I only mention it today is just so that it's reflected in when we get questions. People often ask questions like, well, wait, why doesn't PCC pass through the whole COLA? Why doesn't? It's because we always have to consistently manage the fact that the deficit factor could be introduced at a larger percentage than what we anticipate, and so we try to plan really conservative for those numbers. And so we did. So our adopted budget projections are completely in line with what our tentative budget, because we sort of anticipate when those things might. I mean, the state will start to signal to us when there's going to be deficits or when there are going to be reductions in revenue.
Are both of those numbers a percent of prior year state apportionment? What are they a percent of?
The total tax revenues. Just do you have? I mean, it's a total of the full. Go ahead.
Yeah. So the 8.22 is an increase of the total allocation from the state in general for the pool that they're allocated to.
The total allocation we received last
Correct.
year.
On 20.
And the deficit is a percent of the same number.
Correct.
So why didn't they just allocate less?
It's sometimes it's a political reason because the governor already declared an 8% COLA
In the January budget.
So it's really hard to backpedal and to say, oh, we really can't afford that. We can maybe afford 5%. Yeah, and then there's always a concern that, hey, maybe the deficit factor will be smaller once the October tax filing deadline passes.
And then they can come back and adjust.
Yeah.
But like Justin makes a good point on just sort of the political nature of that January budget's proposal, the governor's budget proposal that gets released. Shell game.
Yeah,
It's a shell game. Remember I tell you every year, it's a shell game. We have more shells to talk about in a little bit, but this is definitely a shell game. All right, so just to ground us in sort of the larger sort of vision for the system, so we have a new chancellor, right? Chancellor Sonia Christian, who has built upon the vision for success, which was under our previous chancellor, and so she has sort of built out this new framework that builds on the vision for success. Now it's called the Vision 2030, okay? So Vision 2030, the fundamental changes or additions, I'll say enhancements that she's really looking to sort of explore and to make more equitable access to education is greater expansion on dual enrollment is going to be a key piece for her. You know, bringing education, one of her key pieces is always bringing education to where people are, not making them come to us. So we see new initiatives like CDC OEI, where the online teaching college, where you can take classes at other community colleges, but go to Pasadena City College. It's now possible for our students to take classes elsewhere that are offered elsewhere. So she's doing a lot on dual enrollment, sort of getting into the high schools. Credit for prior learning is a big sort of initiative for her. So like veterans and how do we give back credit for prior learning. And then the other one is a lot of work on workforce training. So those are her sort of 3 enhancement initiatives that she's bundled in this vision for 2030. Sorry. Which then aligns with the student-centered funding formula. So this is kind of how we're funded. So she's got 3 pillars: equity in access, equity in supports, and equity in success. Those are her 3 pillars. But each of those aligns then with the funding formula piece. So think about equity and access is basically the 60% calculation that we use for what's called our base allocation, which is basically our FTS calculation.
I thought it was 70%.
This is 60. Well, it's a little, it's 60.
Okay.
60, 20, and 20.
I think there may have been a goal introduced when the funding formula was
Started.
first rolled out. Yeah, to have eventually a higher percentage. But then that changed somewhere along the way when the Chancellor's Office had turnover basically on every higher position out there.
And feedback also, I think, from the community, from the larger sort of stakeholders who are watching the student-centered funding formula. So think about our base allocation, so FTS. Equity and supports and equity and success are basically going to be 28% and 20%. So think about the equity and supports, that's called our supplemental allocation. And supplemental allocation is basically credit for enrolling low-income students, so like our Pell recipients. That's how those numbers are calculated. And then equity and success is our success allocation. And think about that, we get funding for transfer to our numbers that when we're transferring to UC or CSU, we get funding there. The number of associate degrees that we award, the number of credit for certificates that get awarded, that's sort of that success piece.
Reduction in units.
Reduction in units, good, look at you. So yes, reduction in units as well. But there's like maybe 10 success metrics that are calculated. But the largest three are going to be transfer to CSU, UC, our associate degrees awarded, and then...
So those haven't changed?
No. This is just how she is describing how the new Vision 2030 goals align to the student-centered funding formula.
Okay.
All right, so now let's talk about 22-23. The state had some challenges, or I would say the Chancellor's Office came back with some challenges for the way that we earned in 22-23. So this is the first reduction that we received based on funding we had already gotten. So if you look on, keeping that there, if you look on page 1, and you look at the line 8630, EPA, notice that what our adopted budget last year was about 34 million. That's what we were supposed to receive and received, right, through apportionment. But our actual unaudited was 11 million, okay? So what happened was the EPA funding allocation was updated by the Department of Finance. And yes, they can do this after we receive it. They can do it. So the calculation was recalced, and in June 2023, the Department of Finance realized that they needed to reduce the general apportionment to $503 million when it was originally projected at $1.56 billion. So you have $1 billion loss in available aid to state agencies. Okay, so what that means for Pasadena City College is that in our apportionment that we already received, we will receive a reduction of 22 million.
It's the 2/3.
Yes. So everybody was like, oh my goodness, right? That's not a small amount of money to sort of miss or adjust. And so there was some trailer bill language enacted in July of 2023, SB 117, the Higher Education Trailer Bill, which then came back to provide revenue to offset the decrease in 2022-23 for 23-24. Okay, but we still have to show it in our books as a loss for 2022-23. So the additional general fund payments will be processed through an early recalc process, and they estimate that we should receive or be made whole in September or October of this year.
does the 36 include the make whole from the 36.3 in 23-24 include the make whole that was missed in 22-23?
So the 36 is what we're projecting that we should receive in 23-24. So what ended up happening in 22-23 is because the state had already given us the money. So, but in order to show the EPA at the level that was projected by the Department of Finance, the Chancellor's Office and the auditors recommended a shift. So you'll see that our state apportionment number at 8611 is at 104 million. So that number is higher. So they're recommending is to shift the difference of the 22 million or 23 million up to the general apportionment because we already have the money. So what's going to impact us for 23-24 is we will not receive EPA funds possibly for 3 to 4 months. And then once we're so-called made whole, they'll give us the money later this year.
Let's separate for simplicity the accounting revenue of the entire year from the cash flow issue.
Yes.
Okay, let's just lay the cash flow issue aside for a moment.
Correct.
So, if I'm understanding it correctly, in 22-23 the EPA was 34. We, in essence, got about 34 or something close to that in 22-23, of which 2/3 of it was put up in 8611. And in 23-24, it's coming back into EPA.
Yeah, 86.
So in the total
The pie is the pie.
cosmos of things, it's all even.
Mhm.
With the exception that when you start to deal with percentages like 8 or -2 equals 6, is it 6 on the 104? Or is it 6 on,
So we're being advised to the 6 and the 104.
okay, so in some ways that helps us then,
Mhm.
Yes.
For 1 year.
for 1 year. We get a little extra pot. EPA, is this forever or is there, how long
Yes.
does it last?
It's forever. It's written into the California Constitution.
And
But the number adjusts every year.
the source of this coming from the state, is it in some way different than the total apportionment sources? I mean, the state gets all its money from income tax and and then it allocates. Is there a, other than it's deciding what it wants to use for state apportionment and what it wants to use for EPA, is there any other factors in the state that are, other than the legislature and governor deciding what those will be in the coming years?
I believe for EPA, the law is very specific about a portion of the personal income tax.
It's a portion of the personal income
Correct.
tax?
Yeah.
Okay. Got it. So that's why it was a voted thing.
Mhm.
Got it. Okay.
I'm still not clear.
It's
So
okay,
let
just a
me
second.
say how I'm understanding it.
Sure.
So in 21-22, the EPA was 31. We had an enrollment decline in 21-22. Oh, no, wait, but,
So in.
okay, that's actual. So we
Mhm.
thought, 21-22,
Mm-hmm,
we thought we were going to get 31
mm-hmm.
million. But because the state revenues were so good,
Mm-hmm.
we got 47 million.
That's correct.
So then the next year, which is the year that just closed, June 30th, we were conservative. We looked at what we got last year, but we still decided to make our budgeted number only 34 million, disregarding the 47 from the year before.
So then the EPA is always connected to the state state general apportionment. So these two number and a few other number in
The
total.
the adopted budget of 31 million and adopted budget of 34 million?
Right, so these two lines, the 8611 general apportionment and the EPA 8630, these two and our property tax, all of it together makes up our apportionment. So it's a little bit of a shell game. Continue the shell game. So it depends on which how well the EPA does each year. So the EPA always gets allocated first, and then the difference is allocated based on the state apportionment. So the state apportionment will backfill whatever that's not enough from the property tax and EPA. So you'll see these two number it shifts a little bit. So back in 21-22, we were conservative on estimating the EPA, but we were a little bit more aggressive on estimating the apportionment. So then the reality came back the reverse. Yeah. And then so same thing as the year that we just finished. We were a little bit higher on, we used to be before the EPA adjustment. We were a little bit higher on apportionment and a little bit lower on EPA. And then after the adjustment, it just shifted.
And the shift from, right, I see that the money, so here it's nearly $100 million, the addition of 82 and 34, or more, sorry, more, 100, 1.2. What? No, 120 million, sorry.
Yeah.
Decimals, they're very important.
Yes.
Okay, so that was about 120 million. And then what we actually got was about 115 million.
Correct. So that could be, so in total, the total would be on the following page. I think this page is going to help us with this presentation. So page 3, out of page 3 of 15.
So it just doesn't matter. These two numbers, I mean, money is fungible, so it just depends for, again, political purposes, which pot they take it out of, or why the disparity, to go from 82, from 60 million the year before to 104 million last year. Why would?
Yeah, so the 104 million last year, that was a normal. That's something that never happened before.
Okay.
Yeah. So let's look at page 3. So page 3, these are shown in totals. So if we look at 21-22 actuals, is 158 million, and then compared to 22-23 actual 177 million. So in total, we are realizing a gain of like 20 million. Yeah, about 20 million. So they're distributed. It's broken up by these group from tax revenue, from enrollment fees, and general apportionment. So our apportionment number is going to vary based on how the other two groups perform. So the property tax is property in our service area. So if that number comes in higher, then our apportionment number will come in lower. And also the same thing with our enrollment fees. If our enrollment fees are higher, then it also affects the other two groups. And then within the general apportionment, there's EPA and also the 8611. The EPA comes in first, and whatever that is, EPA is not able to fill.
And what is EPA made up of?
EPA is Education Protection Account. It's just a legislative.
So it's not connected to any particular revenue.
Personal income tax.
Is the largest portion of that, but there are other pieces that come out of
So if it's regulated by law, EPA, how did they get away with, in the accounting, going down to 11 million?
Well, they were trying to get it with it until all the accountants are bully. So they were trying to be very conservative because the deadline is usually April 15th. So by June, they would have known how much they'll have.
Oh, but
But
it's
now, because it's
October.
October,
Is it October this year too?
Yeah.
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 Is that the new normal?
no, it's only for this year because of a lot of flooding that happened in certain area. And then LA happened to be one of the area that was on the list. So our taxpayer have until October 15th to file their taxes for 2022. Yeah, a lot of people have filed already, but it's just that they're being conservative in estimating that pot of pie.
I guess I still just can't wrap my head because I'm used to business where
Yeah, you make what you earn.
you can't, so this is a learning.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
It
not
doesn't
even-
always make, I would just say what we're eligible for based on the apportionment calculations. And then there is some fungibility on how we receive to get to the apportionment number.
Is the $177 million fair? Is that what, I mean?
For 22, 23, the close of the books.
Uh-huh. Is that,
So this number represents about 1% of the deficit factor. So if based on what the calculated revenue, it should be 1% more. So we should get another 17 million. But because they put in
1.7.
so at June's revised apportionment report, they put in a 0.9 was some change deficit factor in there. Well, I'm sorry, not the June one.
Is that subject to change?
That is also subject to change. Yeah, so we're always on a catch-up game. So so period 1 of this year's apportionment report comes out in January of next year.
2024.
And then the period 2 comes out in June of next year.
which period 1 is what we typically call third quarter?
Correct.
Mhm.
But they're calling it
Keyword.
Yeah, so that's why, but to help the district plan, and the chancellor's office understand that it's really difficult for us to come up with a reasonable budget if we don't know it until January of next year. So they provide what is called an advanced apportionment report. So that comes out in July. So that's largely what we base our estimate.
Okay. But as we see here, we are in a good position because we budgeted for less than we received.
We're always a little bit more conservative.
Because we know.
Jose, is this complicated in the Cal State system?
Yes,
It is different, but just
Yes.
as complicated and convoluted?
yes.
Yeah, okay.
Hey, okay, so now let me blow your mind a little bit more. So we had more adjustments to our prior year funding. And the largest categories hit us in deferred maintenance and the enrollment and retention dollars. So again, based on calculations and adjustments, the total sort of available funding decreased by $452 million.
For all community colleges.
Correct.
Correct. And then the enrollment and retention dollars reduces our 22-23 allocation. We originally were to receive $150 million in one-time funding, and that was reduced to $95 million in one-time funding. But then in 23-24, at least for the enrollment and retention dollars, they were increased by $50 million to give us a total of $145 million for the system. So it's like when they feel like there are adjustments needed or issues related to 22-23, they'll make adjustments. This again causes a lot of distress for districts, for planning purposes, for commitments that the district has already made, particularly in our deferred maintenance sort of categories. It's why we actually always proactively transfer funds from the unrestricted general fund to capital outlay to kind of help with any of these sort of pieces is because we kind of know that they're gonna happen. I mean, they happen fairly regularly. Some years it's larger than others.
These are in different funds than the general fund,
Correct.
these changes.
The deferred maintenance is in a different fund. Enrollment and retention is in a
It's
restricted
in
fund.
restricted general fund. So deferred maintenance in Fund 43, and then enrollment and retention, and also the COVID block grant, these are considered grants, so they're in restricted general fund.
So can we use these, the difference between what we budgeted and what our actual unaudited to pay for deferred maintenance and enrollment and retention?
So the positive of us identifying, being proactive about moving funds out of the unrestricted general fund, whether we're funding OPEB, whether we're funding property and liability, pre-funding property and liability, whether we're gonna move funds to capital outlay. In particular for the unrestricted general fund, the reason why we also do that is because it helps us also with our 50% law. Because remember, expenses of large projects that are not related to the classroom hurt us in the end. And so we think through what those funding sources need to be, what additional funds need funds, and we move that from Fund 1 to 42, or for Fund 41 to, what is 68?
So the 50% law is only on the unrestricted general fund?
Correct.
I thought
And
it was
it's
only on
expenses.
salaries.
Mm-mm.
Okay, can you just?
Yeah, well, I promised I have a slide for that.
Okay,
We'll talk all
okay.
about 50% law, because we're always really worried about it. But that allows us to do this. What the state did though with this adjustment though is because initially they were talking about pulling back that COVID-19 block grant, which for us, we had already received about $10 million. It's like $9.9 million. And so what they did was they made these reductions, but they said, okay, well, we're going to be flexible in the trailer bill language. And it means that we could use funds from the COVID block grant to help with deferred maintenance, to help with enrollment and retention, that these funds are now fungible between the three. But, you know, it's still, it can still be a challenge for us when we're seeing reductions being made. So we're always, again, trying to anticipate when it impacts something that's happened in the past, how do then we need to plan for 23, 24. So we'll talk a little bit about those transfers in just a second. All right, so just at a high level, how did we close fiscal year 2022-23? So this is just the summary pages. And you see that all in your detail in your 30-some-odd page report here. So the projected state apportionment, 177 million, lottery, state mandated claims, all of those pieces resulted in a total revenue of $206 million. And then you look at our then expenses for 22-23, which were about $198 million, with a remaining balance of a little over $8 million, which we just add to the fund balance. And we've kept it in the fund balance because we want to make sure if we have any cash flow issues coming into, you know, because of those reductions, that we have it on hand and we're not having to transfer from other funds to cover any obligations. So that's why you'll see the general fund balance a little bit larger, which we actually appreciate.
It looks like our non-resident tuition bounced back from what I remember a year or two ago.
It did, yeah. It used to be really low, like 2020, 2021, but Olivia Liu, who's the director over International Students, is doing a fabulous job at really recruiting and coming up with real innovative strategies on increasing.
Do you know how that 7.7 million figure compares to 2019?
It was, we used to be at 5 million.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
so we've gone beyond what we were pre-COVID?
Oh, pre-COVID was 10 million.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
We've also
We're still-
raised tuition
Right.
significantly.
That's not counted here. This is how we closed the books last year. That would be in our 23-24.
I see.
Did we raise tuition the previous year too?
No, I don't know that we did for,
Yeah, a little bit.
Because I think
But
we're
not-
using the same formula every
no.
year, right?
Yeah, it's just not.
Thank you for asking, because it smells wonderful. Love the smell.
what, of what, coffee?
I'm happy to report.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yes, sure.
You know.
All right, so last year, what I think we did a little bit different was to identify those transfers up front. And it's gonna be a little bit different for 2024, but at least last year, we had about 16 million in designated transfers, most of which went to capital outlay and the irrevocable trust for OPEB.
Would that be the Seraphian building?
No, actually, the trust is our OPEB pension liabilities, and we invested an additional 7.3 million last year, which Jessie has really good news. I'm gonna let her share it because Trustee Martin might fall off of his chair. Since we just got the most recent actuary study report.
Well, thank you, Kathy.
Yeah,
for letting me
yes,
do
you
that.
get the good news
I'm trying to
today.
find it.
Okay, but what was the capital outlay fund?
Transfers?
Yeah.
Oh, that just goes to help fund different various construction projects on campus. It could be related to, we were doing some work on like gender neutral bathrooms, lactation rooms, things like that.
And also the large capital purchases that require.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
So like the new
forklift,
vehicles,
Yes.
the boom lifts. Yeah, we had a good list.
Yeah, by moving it here, it doesn't affect our 50%.
So strategic in that regard. So our funded liability for OPEB used to be 47,
47.6%,
and now, Jesse, it is,
73%.
Okay, I don't
look at
get
his
it.
face, look at his face. I love it, I
That is, yeah.
love it. Yes, so we just got that news on Friday.
Okay, explain.
That's okay. So the OPEB is our post-employment benefit. So it's us helping to pay for our retirees' benefits. Yeah, so whoever that is service and retired at Pasadena City College that have more than 21 years of service, we will pay for that individual's health benefits until the age of 65. So that evaluation is to estimate how much it will cost the district if we have to pay for all of the expenses all today. So that valuation came back because we've been strategically making investments towards funding that liability. So with the addition of the 7.3 we made last year, we were able to significantly reduce our liability.
So we have funded, so before we had funded 46% of that liability, and now
The
we've
investments
funded
would have,
73%.
it's huge. We're waiting for them to let us know how we fare in the state.
Did you see
We
the
think we're
article
gonna be good.
in today's New York Times about the leveling off of Medicare expenses? That nobody
Didn't.
knows why, the top story.
So I'm gonna guess we're 7.5 million away from having it totally funded then. Because if 7.3 took
Got us
us
to-
from 47 to 73, then another 7.3,
Could get us to
7.8
100% funded.
maybe would get us to 100.
Would
We
that
could do
be
some-
wise?
We could do some calculations on that for sure.
Yeah, well, I'm just approximating. I'm just saying where the, yeah.
It's a wonderful legacy that I think has carried through the board, that I think this was a really good, prudent decision in the past that has continued to bear some fruit based on our continued investments. But we were really happy to see that number on Friday.
Oh, it's only good.
And it's not something that governments typically do. So, I mean, many municipalities and state agencies are underwater there.
Well, we're already enough underwater on the Sturs and Calvary side. It'd be nice to, that's great.
Make some progress there, yeah.
So keep that going.
Yes. All right, so that was last year, or how we closed out, and those are unaudited. Remember, we'll get our audited view in December at the end of this year.
But that rarely changes.
It will, yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I mean, fingers crossed, nothing will change.
That's where the auditor comes and tells us a blank page is a
yeah,
good thing.
yes,
Right?
yes, that's what they say, you know what they say. All right, next slide. All right, I always like because, you know, my eye always points to stuff that's different. And so I just always like to proactively kind of look at what the differences are in our 22, 23 variance between budget and actuals. One of which we've already talked about. So the first one is 8199, the other federal reserves. So because the funding sources, so if you go to under the federal funding lines, first page, 8199, you'll see that the actual, we had budgeted a little over 700,000.
We have forest reserve.
Yeah, there's a little bit there.
Yeah, that's, it's silly. It's really just for students that live in the Angelo Forest area, so we get a little bit of money for students that live there.
Interesting. Sorry.
It's okay, it's okay. We had budgeted a little over 700,000, we only claimed about 70,000. And so this is, if you think through, remember we had all those CARES and HERF dollars, and we were able to draw down and get lost revenue income from those funds, and so that's going to dwindle, and so we see a difference there in particular. We've already talked about the Educational Protection Act, the EPA 8630, and then the last one that's something of note is the way our cash is valued. We don't lose cash, but it describes sort of how our cash is valued on the market. So that's line 8817, the educational revenue augmentation. And the particular line is that unrealized gain loss on cash in, which is about 1.6 million. Last year it was about 1.5, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
8817 is like our cash return on cash invested kind of idea.
Yeah, that's kind of like the unrealized loss or gain on cash.
How do you have a loss?
Because I guess our
It's just the way it's sort of like valued, I guess.
yeah, it's what the investment return if we would have invested somewhere else versus how letting it sitting dormant in our like
I'm sorry.
Oh.
That's all part of 8817.
I'm sorry, 8861.
Oh.
There's a typo on it. 8861.
Oh.
See
I
it?
see.
Yeah. My apologies.
Oh, so, and we're starting to break away from LACO.
We are in the beginning steps of becoming accountable.
Yes.
our initial meeting
Okay,
next
so
month.
replay how you lose money on cash again.
Now we don't lose money per se, but it doesn't
It's
just
opportunity cost.
Oh, unrealized.
Unrealized.
Never mind. I got it.
And does every district get a figure that shows them their, a similar line 8861?
Yeah, it's a GASB and it's a GASB standard, so it's accounting standard.
So why would any district, community college or K-12, put their money in LACO if you can see in black and white that you're losing?
It only hurts us in years where sort of you have these rising other factors that are hitting the market, right? Like 3 years ago, we didn't have unrealized gain loss on cash in.
Okay.
It's okay.
It's driven by the market though. But to your point,
It's more short-term investments.
It
It's
is.
not really
It's-
cash.
yeah.
It's unrealized gain on short-term investments in our fiduciary, who is like, it's the cash word that makes it
Right. It makes
seem
it look,
weird,
yeah, seem as real, but it's really just a
but it's because they have an investment pool.
yeah.
Well, it should be called opportunity cost of leaving money with LACO.
It's short-term.
We're breaking away from
Short term, yeah.
It's short-term investments is what it is. Anyway.
The only other piece that I just always like to point out is when our expenses are down in particular areas, in academic classified salaries. This is actually, it's a good thing. We're trending in the right direction. So this last year when we closed the books, our expenses in academic and classified salaries were down a little over 5 million, but just the previous year, it was double that, $10.6 million. And so what this is telling us is we're sort of trending in the right direction, that people are starting to come back to the job force. We are starting to hire and getting people into positions, but we still have this overall expense down in this particular category that doesn't currently match our pre-pandemic numbers. So it's not a bad thing, it's just more of a note. And then services, our overall expenses are down a little bit over 5.5 million.
And what would those be?
That could be like utility costs, contracts. They're actually on page, yeah. So it gives you a list of all the different types of,
Wow.
I'm sorry, what page?
Page 8 of 15.
8 and 9, right? Consultants, insurance registration, board elections are under there, auditing services. So, we always,
In some ways, I don't mean to sum it up in too high of a level, but if you have a hold harmless and you're getting the same amount of revenue, and you had 30,000 students, and now you have 20,000 students, and you're offering classes for 20,000 students, so the expenses are
Gonna go
significantly down and the revenue's the same.
that is true.
That's kind of what
For now.
Yes.
has happened
Yeah.
until the hold harmless goes away and the revenue drops.
The revenue will never drop lower than where we're at in 24, 25. That becomes our new base.
In 20.
But it can
and the
never
hold-
grow.
The hold harmless ends in this year, so 24, 20, well, we'll get to 24,
Yes.
25.
Yeah.
But that's,
Yeah, 24, 25 revenue will be what our base revenue will be in 25, 26, 26, 27,
no matter
unless,
how many students.
no matter, it doesn't matter until we recover our enrollment losses.
It just won't increase.
Correct.
You just don't get COLAs until
Correct.
FTS gets it.
That is correct. Which is a challenge for us, right? Because our costs are going to continue to increase.
And you're talking about total apportionment, of which a piece is, that's separate from where we started this conversation with the other 20% and the other 20% of,
The success in the supplemental allocations.
so just the general 60% is capped?
Yeah, but no, it's you have to look at it. If we haven't hit our pre-pandemic numbers, our success numbers and our supplemental allocation numbers are also going to be impacted. So if we have less students, we're going to have less people transferring, we're going to have less Pell Grant recipients. So it's sort of elastic, right? They impact each other.
Okay,
Good question.
because it's based on total numbers, not percentages. So even
Correct.
though our percentages might be getting better, the
We
numbers are,
need bodies.
the money comes on bodies, okay.
Well, bodies help the success in supplemental allocation.
Bodies
numbers.
that do well.
Yes. Yeah,
Well,
because
there's
we're
two
providing
variables
support
there.
services.
You got the percent you're doing well,
Yes.
and the total number of bodies. I mean, and they kind of can go together or they can offset each other.
It's true. I mean, we could have more bodies and be doing worse in our success matrix.
I don't know which one has the greater impact. I'm guessing the total body.
60%.
Greater
Bodies
impact.
help.
Yeah.
We shouldn't say it, but numbers help, right?
But it's it's a multivariable.
Yes, all three.
All right.
All right, so this is how we're intending to start our adopted budget for 23-24. So you see our state apportionment numbers are up. Remember, we got that 8.22% COLA with the deficit factor, so it's like, right, factored into that. Lottery, state mandated claims. We are estimating higher on our non-resident tuition based on what Dr. Goodman said, our fees are higher. CalSTRS on behalf payment, remember that's just a pass-through for us.
Then the state kindly says, let me pay part of your obligation for pensions.
Yes, to the pool. They
Yes.
did a contribution to the pool.
Right.
Yeah, and then we get a portion.
Credited to
Credited
our
to our
teachers and our staff, to our pension obligation.
Correct.
And
Is
then-
it not kindly?
Yes.
I don't know, that's debatable. So our total revenue is a little over 218 million with our projected expenses. So again, I always like to point out, please remember that the bulk of our expenses are budgeted in salary and benefits. And so whenever we're having an issue or a concern, we think about that a lot because reductions in these other lines don't really move the pendulum much if we needed to. And so we're very thoughtful and mindful of the fact that the bulk of our revenue goes into salary and benefits. So supplies and materials, all that's pretty normal, operating expenses and services. We always do a little bit of a transfer to capital outlay, that 0.3%. But right now, we've only projected an outgoing transfer of 7.8 million. And if you go to the next slide, that will tell you what that makes up. So usually, remember the previous fiscal year, we had transferred proactively a little like $16, $17 million to other funds, right? We did OPEB, but at the beginning of this fiscal year, we're only gonna elect to transfer the 7.8 million, which largely is going to the restricted general fund, so that's gonna help fund our parking and our health fees. The other largest contributions are gonna be to pre-fund property and liability self-insurance, and then again, the OPEB self-insurance fund at 2.1 million. Whereas normally, there's a missing or an allocation that will, once we get all the EPA piece resolved, then we'll do a later transfer, probably in the January, February timeline, to then transfer out of the unrestricted general fund to our various funds. So whether more goes to capital outlay, Fund 41, right now there's only $600,000 that gets transferred there. That's largely related to the tech refreshes. Yes.
Oh, did you just say capital outlay goes to tech refreshes? Is
That $600,000
Oh, the
is designated
$600,000,
for
okay.
tech refresh.
Boy, would I love to see that on all the, I know I'm never gonna have this. It's a dream.
You can dream.
I'm dreaming that when every month you get those tech invoices,
Yes.
and instead of clutching my heart, my pearls, and going, oh my, this is a lot of money, if I could see, look, we've allocated $600,000 and deduct this, and we still have this amount
Okay.
left.
Let me think through how I can accomplish that on that report.
Instead of just every month, my goodness.
Yes, yes. But remember, not all of those, just so picking on tech refresh, not all of the funds that fund tech refresh come out of capital outlay. It's possible some could come from SWP, there's a lot of sources that people use funding to help support technology on campus. This is actually the departmental allocation for ITS to manage the tech refreshes for, every year we do a third of the replacements for like computers and laptops because of our refresh cycle, right? People have old equipment, and so there's like this cadence that your name comes on a list and you're given a new computer. And so that helps to fund a good portion of that.
So my question for that one was with the operating, where was the, did you say restricted general fund goes to?
So the 2.9 million, that 03,
Oh,
is that
yeah.
the one that you're talking
Yeah.
about? That's largely health and parking.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Well, there was capital outlay.
Yes.
Okay, capital outlay, that's what you said,
Fund
was tech
41.
refresh. Okay, because I was
Sorry,
thinking if
yeah.
it was, I was thinking if it was capital, but I think of capital projects
Oh,
as building.
Yeah.
And I was wondering why we needed to allocate that since we have our bond
Oh,
that we'll be
yeah.
drawing from.
No, this is like most equipment, we want
Equipment.
purchased out of capital, so it's not purchased out of the unrestricted general fund, which would hurt our 50% law.
Okay.
So we do proactively transfer out of that fund to then go to capital outlay.
Okay.
So you can imagine, and the reason why I make this mention is because mid-year, we expect to do a transfer from the general fund to various funds because of the EPA sort of resolution piece. We expect by the first of next year for that to be resolved. So we may be able to contribute more, are expected to contribute more to capital outlay to help with that deferred maintenance offset. Right, so we had a reduction there in 22, 23. So we kind of like think through what any reductions are happening and then help pre-fund them. So we pre-fund
So-
property and liability.
It's interesting to me what a difference the individuals in a particular college or district make. That if they're not good with predicting, analyzing, and knowing what the state does, a college
Could be in a lot of trouble.
could be in a lot of
Trustee
trouble.
Silver, you were very lucky to have us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Candace. Thank you, Audrey, Alex.
It's true though, it can be, I mean, it can
Why?
be definitely a challenge. And we have some partners who are in some challenging economic times.
It's kind of like, why does the state make it so complicated that it's so easy to mess up?
That's a big question for a lot of different things, right? Why does the state make it so
Yeah.
difficult?
That's because, I mean, it's only recently that they would even pass a budget on time. I mean, you know, the governor's initial budget proposal gets changed in May, and then there's a discussion with the legislature, and then hopefully we get something by July 1st, and it's often very different than what it was projected to be in January. And so we're actually in a fairly stable period in terms of planning compared to what we used to experience. I mean, I remember working for the state where we wouldn't get paid. They would pay us minimum wage because that was all that the Constitution would allow them to pay us because we didn't have a state budget passed on time. I mean, I remember budgets getting passed in like October when school had already started. And people were just sort of, you know, it was magical.
We're gonna make sure you get paid.
Well, they changed that. And then they started, because the legislators would get paid during that time. And as soon as the controller, I still remember this, John Chung decided that the legislators would be treated the same way. And ever since that happened,
It's been on time.
it's been on time.
I'd like to circle in on CalPERS and CalSTRS.
Of course.
So you've got almost 700,000 up here in a transfer. And then in the budget, I'm seeing on page 6 of 15, there's the, 6 of 15 where you have the STRS and PERS, and I'm just doing some quick math in my head, it could be off a little bit, but we got 21 million for STRS and 11 million in PERS or something like that. There was a multi-year increased percentage that we would have to be contributing every year, which I assume is why
Baked
we
into.
see these large numbers here. This is reflecting whatever
Those percentages.
those percentages are.
So like the CalSTRS employment rate is 19.10%,
The CalSTRS is
STRS.
19.
and that's stable across 23, 24, 24, 25,
Oh,
25,
that's,
26.
oh, that is.
Yes, but the CalPERS employment rate is not. So that rate in 23, 24 is 26.68%. the projected percent contribution in 24-25 is 27.7%. In 25-26, it's 28.3%. And then in 26-27, it's 28.7%.
Of what?
Of the
Salaries, compensation.
That's why we're always thinking through, again, because if the apportionment adjustment, let's call it that, Dr. Gomez and I had talked about, we're not going to call it COLA anymore, we're going to call it an apportionment adjustment. So this apportionment adjustment that we receive, remember, it's applied on the whole, and we're still then, if you think about then COLA that we're actually giving out in salary, that has a direct impact on these contributions that we need to make in the future, right? Not only this year, but,
Does the state have any guess that by 2027, with these increased rates, will the liability that's owed get close to 100%? Or are we still going to be significantly unfunded, just this is as high as they've gone, as far out as they've gone? Does the state have a clue on that?
do you want the reality? I don't think that they have a clue on that.
They're just doing this. These numbers
I don't
aren't
think that-
tied to a calculation that
I
gets
don't-
you anywhere other than better. Okay.
That's-
And are municipalities contributing at a similar rate?
It depends.
Yeah, depends on what pool they're in. Sometimes in municipalities, they have their own, they fund their own pension programs. Like the OGM.
Now, we have the investments, what's their name, PARs.
Yes.
And I know there's several different parts of PARs. I'm trying to recount here. And I thought there was an OPEB part of PARs and then a PERS and STIRS part of PARs. I don't think there's three, there's two, right?
Yeah.
There's the PERS, STIRS, and the
And the
OPEB.
pension, yeah.
So when you're transferring almost $700,000 for PERS, STIRS, is that going to the PERS, STIRS PARs? No, that's just internal
Most of
to
it's-
our fund.
Yes.
Yeah, because we don't get credit. when we put it in.
So in addition to PARs, and in addition to whatever we're funding in the budget, which is basically gone, I mean, that just goes to the state, that's gone. It's not helping our
Mhm.
financial position at all, it's just the cost of business. So we got the 7 million, and then it's 67, I can't see the number,
For OPEB or
but for the PARs, STIRS,
60?
STIRS,
So Fund
69.
64 is.
69?
OPEB, Yep,
okay.
69 is.
Yeah, and here's the 694 here. So we've got whatever's at PARs, plus we've got 2 million, and that 2 million will, by the end of, also have 2.7 million.
Because that's with us. I mean, we still.
That's
have
ours.
that.
And the benefit of having it here, as opposed to PARs, is we can transfer it back.
If we need it,
You can do whatever you want.
any one of those funds.
The
yeah.
disadvantage of having it here, it's in LACO, which
Then
we
they-
just talked about,
Yes,
rather than being
Yes.
in PARs,
yes. Doesn't make us any,
which has done significantly better.
yes.
Okay.
This is
This,
something you advocated for, right?
yes. So I'm just interested, and you don't have to give me an honest answer,
Okay,
but it would be nice.
okay.
This is something you don't have to shout out to the full board, and there's nobody else here, and we're not being recorded, I don't think, right?
Yes, we are.
Oh, we are being recorded. Okay, so you may want to give me the politically correct answer instead of the honest answer. But, you're dealing with $694,994. Now, obviously, that's what gets it, the plug that gets it to zero. So you're dealing with some, you're dealing with some weird numbers up here. So in one way, I'm asking, how did you come up with 700,000 is the amount you wanted to transfer this year in the bigger picture? And in the smaller picture, it looks like, was that about you started with some other number and that was the plug that was left? I'm just saying, that's kind of the way it looks. So now you can give me a politically correct answer, or you can give me an honest answer, or you can just say we'll talk about it at a different time. But anyway,
We're
I'm
always
just
trying to look for gaps and where we can contribute additional funds to other fund sources, we do.
okay. We'll go with that. Then also on page 6 of 15, neatly wedged between stirs and purrs is account 3189.
Yes. Do you want to know where that is, what that is?
Yes, I'd like to know.
So that is where we've initially budgeted 1.5 million for, of that dollar amount is for the part-time health benefits for our adjuncts. So this is our first year where we're having to budget for that. And that's where we've assigned it until we get a better idea and number about how many faculty are going to be eligible and elect to participate.
Wait, I see 1.149. Is that right?
That
That's
was,
online.
that was.
That's 22,
22. Yeah,
Okay, and
so,
the next year, 2.6 million.
yes. So distributed reserves can be used for, so the largest portion of that is going to be helped to support adjunct faculty benefits. And overload for faculty. Good catch. All right.
Okay.
Last slide. So budgeted positions, let's talk about this. This is when we get into that nice 50% log calculation of expenses. So we edged on in again this year. So 2022-23 actuals, our percentage spent expenses in the classroom for instructional purposes is 50.70%. Remember, we have to always be over 50%. And where that's particularly important, and so where we always are pushing on is anytime, whether it's positions, things that impact expenses, if that's going to cause us to go below the 50% law, that's when we're sort of either having different conversations with hiring managers or making different decisions about what positions can be filled or not filled. Because we must be over 50% on instructional expenses. And these are expenses. So it's not what we budgeted, it's actually what we expend throughout the year. So it gets calculated at the end of the year. The reason why that number is of particular importance, where again, we're not trying to add new positions, is because we have 11 custodial positions that are currently funded on restricted CARES funds that must move back to general funds when those dollars expire in June 30th of 2024.
What, can you tell me what 50% of what?
Our apportionment revenue has to be allocated specifically for instructional purposes, like in the classroom teaching. So for example, non-instructional faculty are considered on the wrong side, quote, wrong side of the 50% loss. So they do counselors or are librarians. They don't help on the 50%, even though they're considered faculty. They're non-instructional faculty, so they are on the wrong side of the 50%. All of our positions are on the wrong side of the 50% law. So anything that's sort of non-instructional that gets added, we have to be very critical about.
And instructional expenses are salary and benefits?
Salary, it could be other items. I mean, it could be like expenses for classroom sort of activity there.
Field trip?
No, because that's not usually.
Could be maybe chemicals in a chemistry lab, maybe? Is that-
It could,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Instructional materials.
Instructional materials that are not funded, let's say, through lottery. But what it's showing here is for 22-23, remember we had that increase in our fawn allocation numbers, so you'll see that our academic numbers have grown. So
Can
from
you
458.
Like both of these, I know, I've had it explained, that the faculty obligation number was developed for PCC like 20 years ago?
Not for PCC, but for the Chancellor's Office. Go ahead, Jesse.
For the,
Cut you off.
that's okay, for the system, for the whole system. California Community College system,
Yeah.
so it applies to all of us. And then it's tied to our level of funding. So, and our fund number is really highly inflated because we elected into hold harmless, we also elected into COVID emergency protection. Those provided us with additional funding, but also what came with it was additional bond number. So last year, the initial bond calculation came out to be that we have to replace and hire 58 positions. 20 of them are to replace retirements, and then the 38 are to new position to meet our bond.
Even though we have a decreased.
Correct. Yeah, that's a
Enrollment.
highly debated topic.
Okay, can you
Highly contested.
explain, because I was like listening. So can you say it one more time? 'Cause I'm gonna write it down.
Oh, sure, yeah.
Okay, okay.
So the fund is tied to our level of funding. Higher of funding equals to higher fund number.
And there's a formula for that?
Yes.
Very complicated formula.
And the COVID monies that came from the federal government were part of it?
No, that was not part of it. So the COVID money is in our grant, so in the restricted general fund.
Mhm.
So that was separate from the emergency, the COVID Emergency Protection Act. That's actually a state enacted program.
Okay.
So we decided to opt into that because that provided us about 10 to 11 million extra in funding each year.
So that state COVID emergency money increased.
So is it-
Our apportionment funding,
Which would impact our fawn number.
And for how long?
so it expired June 30th of this year.
Does the fawn
But
go
the
down?
fawn number, how?
Does
how
the
long?
fawn go down when the money goes away?
The fund will be recalculated when the money goes
Oh,
away.
because it's a percent of imports.
Correct.
Correct, yeah. But what's tricky about this year is because of the huge EPA adjustment in June. So the Chancellor's Office recalculated our fund, and now we are
Over.
60 or 70 below what they initially calculated.
Positions, teaching positions?
Yeah, full-time equivalent positions.
On top of the 58?
So yeah, so our 58, they bump us up to 58 plus, and now they're lowering our fund number to as they gave us.
Technically, we have more faculty than was needed.
And what was required?
Right,
at the time.
But it'll be recalculated. So on the one hand, right, so we'll receive that revenue back. It'll be recalced, and we expect it not to be as high as 58 anymore, but it won't be like,
Can we balance our fawn in the spring semester?
no.
So it's an annual.
Yeah,
Yes.
so they usually comes out in fall of each year. Yeah, so this year the state was explicit of saying that they're going to wait until the EPA situation is resolved before they'll
calculating.
recalculate.
So the calculation is based on
Our apportionment.
apportionate, which is 8611 and 8630.
I have a colorful sheet I can.
Oh, a colorful sheet.
That isn't my
She
cheat
likes
sheet.
colors.
8611.
So
You can have this one.
we probably won't be hiring a lot of full-time faculty in the near future once we get over this hump because they pulled it back down.
Mhm.
That's all the components.
We'll learn what the new calculates. Here's the positive. This is the best time for this to happen, right? We're in hold harmless. I mean, there isn't a loss for us this year or even next. So even if our bond number came in lower, it just tells us the decision that we don't have as many positions to rehire. We have retirements every year. And so, you know, we just adjust.
And there are some disciplines where we're always gonna need to be higher, like nursing, for example.
Are we allowed to pay faculty more, like a computer science faculty member than others to attract them to teach at PCC? No.
We can send that question to Bob for the official, but no, they are on a salary schedule based on their degree, like if they have masters, if they have a PhD or
We have to
EDD.
negotiate.
Yeah, they have a set salary schedule.
That's the way it's done in the CSU and the UC.
How?
It depends on your discipline, it depends on the market. So different faculty receive different compensation depending on their fields,
With similar academic degrees.
similar academic degrees. Similar terminal degrees, but different kinds, right? If
Right.
you're usually it's engineering, business,
Mhm.
computer science, those are the fields where, you know, incoming faculty receive higher wages and benefits, which is not the case here, and, you know, depends on how you look at it.
There are pros and cons to both of
Yeah.
those.
Yeah.
You're gonna get to this.
Yes, we
And I have
can.
a question on this related to the OPEB benefits, but we'll talk about that after you get to this.
So that's the end of the presentation. So if there are no further questions on the adopted budget, but based on,
Okay, wait, that was
The end of
the
it just says questions.
budgeted full-time equivalent positions.
correct.
Yes.
936 and 989. Okay, thank you. Bravo, well done.
And that's also in here, right? That's on page, that's not quite as easy to read, but in here, I remember something.
So we received a question in our board questions related to sort of more of a 3-4 year projection of like, how does this adopted budget sort of impact us today, but also kind of project for us in the next 3 years? And so we've done that here to start with what are the budget assumptions. And so you see the first column is 23-24. So this is just what we've just reviewed. The adopted budget has the 6% negotiated labor settlement embedded within it. And then it projects then, even though we received our higher COLA, minus the deficit factor, and then it projects then where we're at, what the ending reserve balance would be at the end of 23-24.
For presentation purposes,
Sure.
you might net the COLA
Okay.
to, you know, down to 5 point whatever it was, 9, whatever,
Okay, yeah, it's like, yes,
whatever, just for presentation.
okay.
Because it's.
Just to describe the
Because
deficit.
you're
deficit factor.
you know, you read this, you would think you did 833 times some number, and you didn't. You did
Mhm.
5 something. So,
Okay.
anyway.
Good suggestion, thank you, we'll take that. And then what we do is then you take the ending reserve estimated balance, and then you start fiscal year 24-25, right? That's the starting reserve balance. Then what our estimated revenue would be. Notice that the estimated revenue for 24-25, 25-26, and 26-27 is the same. And the reason why that is, so 24-25 has a planned COLA of 3.94% that's embedded within it, but no COLAs are planned for 25-26 or 26-27.
Then why
Even
does
though
it
the
say
planning,
3.2? Oh.
even though the planning COLA for the state is 3.29 and 3.19. The difference here, and we can sort of make this, you see these asterisks here? We're not eligible for the COLA based on the enrollment. And so, you know, we're the glass,
We're being
glass,
told.
yes. Glass is empty kind of gals. And so we're planning for us not to receive the COLAs in those years.
How much would our enrollment approximately have to increase
3,000
by 3,000?
in a year, approximately.
FTES?
So we've gone up about 800 from last fall to this fall in FTE. Which is good. I mean, it's encouraging. We're going in
It's
the right
the right
direction, but we're not going to get to where we need to get
By 25.
soon enough. Yeah.
So we just kind of then build that into then what the fund balance, ending fund balance would be for 25, 26, and then 26, 27 with that stable, or I should say static estimated revenue.
So
Now,
estimated
if our-
2% on the health.
Mm-hmm.
In the
For this-
expenses for compensation, is there a percent or no?
Compensation for 25,
Salaries.
26, and 26, 27, there is no compensation outside of the normal step and column increases. So you'll also notice there are two numbers here in gold, right? It says transfers, process, projects, hiring fees. Okay, remember, our costs are going to continue to go up, right? Benefit costs are going to continue to go up, step increases are going to continue to happen, contracts that the district negotiates could go up. And so, but if our revenue is flat, then in years 25, 26, and 26, 27, we're just saying we're going to need to adjust our budget a little bit, little tightening of our belt in 25, 26, about 250,000. That's totally doable. But then it starts to increase as those years grow, right? So we're going to have to tighten our belts a little bit more in 26, 27. Again, if we have not gained the enrollment back to the pre-pandemic numbers, because our base is going to continue to remain, although our costs will increase. So we estimate our tightening of our belts in 26, 27 to be about 4.8 million.
Let me express what I'm reading, and you tell me if I got this correct.
Okay.
So, and I'm more focused here on, well, first off, in 23, 24, and I realize this is high level, and we do have some $7 million of transfers planned.
Mm-hmm.
And this is looking at, I think, just the general fund, correct?
Unrestricted general fund. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so it seems if those transfers happen the way we have it projected, wouldn't that reduce the exceed below reserve by the same 7 million?
Trying to make sure I understand your question.
Okay, if there was 7 million in the yellow up for 23, 24,
Okay.
would the second line up from the bottom exceed or below reserve of 9 million? Would that go down by, wouldn't that be reduced by 7 million because we transferred it away? It's actually a minus 7 million in the gold.
It actually
We
wouldn't,
wouldn't-
because it's accounted for in the estimated expense and transfer, the 218.
Oh,
So if
you
you
have
did it, it would
you have that
increase.
7 million
Correct.
Yeah.
Already baked
up
into
in the
23.
218.
Correct.
Okay. So
So
I don't know
if we
if
didn't
this is,
transfer it,
I don't know where this is gonna go beyond here, if it's gonna go to full board or not, you may not wanna do that, I don't know. But for presentation purposes, I would put the 7 million as a minus down here, just so it's really clear, because you just talked about the 7 million over here, or whatever the number is.
Is this a document for the board?
I don't
Is this
know, I already forgot about it, so.
Okay. Well, it's important to me for reasons I'm about to get to.
I can't hold so many things in my
Well, no, I know, I can't either, but I'm trying to stay on the high-level things.
Yes.
And the high-level things are funding CalSTRS and PERS, funding OPEB, and following these balances. And so,
It depends who you are, what the high level things are.
no, it is. But as a board, as one single board member, to me, I'm just trying to follow the big picture. And to me, that's a little confusing, because I see XMA expenses. It says and transfers, so it's very clear. It says and transfers. So it just, because we're talking about taking 4.8 million out of OPEB and other funds in 26, 27, right?
No.
What's that,
It's
4.8
any-
million,
It's, okay. let
4
me-
stars over there? What's that talking about?
Everything.
It's possible that in 26, 27, we would need to reduce our transfer totals by 4.8 million, or make other decisions related to, like, strategies could be reducing our travel budgets. Strategy, I mean, there are a lot of things that could, that's just the easiest sort of like identification. These are transfers that we normally make. We could not make them in the future. But we would receive input from the board. We would make some recommendations, like we normally do, to help manage any sort of increase in costs, but reduction in revenue.
So again, I'm gonna just tell you what I just heard and saw. Okay, and it's,
Okay.
you said it a little bit differently just then.
Okay.
So back a few slides ago, we came to the conclusion that we're approximately 7 to 8 million away from fully funding OPEB. And that was, and we were making a 2 million transfer, I think it was, in 23, 24. That takes us 5 to 6 million short of our target, best what we can guess our target is.
But that's to cover the current costs, not, that 2 million doesn't go to the trust.
Okay, so we're still 7 million short.
Correct.
Thank you.
Correct.
So what I see then is in 3 years, without any salary increase, which, that's a really nice thought to think we're going to go 3 years without giving some salary increases other than stepping comp. That's probably not going to happen. So without that, which every percent, I don't know what 1% across the board in salary increases, you gave us that number many years ago. I don't remember what it is, and you may not know it right offhand, but okay, we can probably look at it really quick. It's in here.
It's right in the slide.
There's a total comp number in here.
So 1%,
Total comp, 163 million. So 1%, actual unaudited 22-23 was 16.3 million, budgeted is 18 million. Pick a number. 18, 1%. 18 million. Okay, so we're 4.8 million short if we don't give any raises at all in 24 and 25. But if we get just a 1% raise in each of those years, the 4.8 million would go to another minus 18, 36, 36, and 4 and 5, we're at 50 million. follow what I just did?
Mhm.
Okay. That's a different picture than what you see on this page. That's a different picture, and you know, I'm not saying this is a bad picture, I'm just saying, I'm trying to get the big picture,
Mhm.
because that's my job, is the big picture. So, you know, big picture, without putting more money into OPEB, you know, you probably built in those PERB, STIRS increases you gave us, I'm sure those are all.
The percentages.
That's good.
Mhm.
Yeah, so we've got kind of we've got an issue here. But that's what I'm trying to get my mind around. Because we built it. Oh, you didn't build in the increases, so that's
No.
true. So that we have going for us,
Correct.
except if we're in hold harmless, do you get those
We'll-
increases?
We will for 24, 25,
I
whatever.
see that one.
But we won't get it for 25, 26, or 26.
So the biggest issue we're facing in 25, 26, and 26, 27 is short of an extension on hold harmless.
Mhm.
Every 1% increase we want to give in compensation is 18 million. And we're not going to get any additional revenue to cover it.
That's correct. So the way
Never
that
mind trying to fund my extra 7 million to get OPEB to coast on its own, so you never have to fund it again, right?
We may be able to, at the beginning of the year, when the EPA issue gets resolved, to then see where we're at, recalculate where we're at, and make an additional contribution to the trust in early '24. We just don't know yet. I mean, that could be our intention.
As much as that warms my heart, based on what you're presenting here, I hate to say it, but it would be better to put it back and fund whatever it is with the other little 2 million over there,
Mm,
because there's a really good chance it's part of the 4.8. As much as I don't like to
Want
say
it to
that
be.
publicly when somebody's recording my voice, I'm trying to be realistic about the numbers that we're looking at.
I think that's good feedback for us.
The benefit of putting it in the trust is you can't do that. And it makes money to help us get to the 100% so that you don't have to contribute in the future. It's like if you could ever get to the magic bullet, you know, you can ever get to that spot where the return covers your costs,
Yeah.
then you can let it cruise on its own. But it's getting to that number, or else it just starts unwinding the same way that we've been trying to wind it up so hard.
Yeah. We'll be mindful of that.
Skates come down the stairs so much faster than they are when you push it out.
It's good feedback. We'll
Okay.
think through that.
But this it would help me to kind of see the transfers in the yellow, that's all I was saying.
Okay.
But
We can add that. And the other thing that we'll adjust just on the column headers is to say, like, no COLA included in revenue calculations. Like, we'll make that more clear that that wasn't, the 3.29 and the 3.19 are not included in the estimated revenue.
And not that contract negotiations with our teams is ever based on a lot of reality. We should be thinking about multi-year contracts with a clause that says this is what the contracts need to be with a reopener if the hold harmless is extended, or, you know, that would be a logical approach. I mean, this is encouraging me to really want to get a multi-year contract,
Mhm.
because there's some really tough circumstances here.
We can give that feedback to Bob for sure.
Okay, but kind of polishing this up a little more and keeping this going as things change, I think is important.
Okay, we will make
At
sure.
least for this committee.
Okay.
Because somebody on the board needs to. And I appreciate you doing it because I know there's so many unknowns.
Yeah.
So you make assumptions and you say these are the assumptions, and
Yeah.
when reality changes and assumption changes, your things change.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you for the feedback.
What else?
Have the 311 report.
Yeah.
Done with
I'll
adopted
go
budget.
fast on this.
So we're gonna, I guess,
You
just.
want a motion,
yes,
right?
yes,
To
please.
recommend this as is for
Yes.
this year.
Correct.
So moved?
And I'll second it. Discussion. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're recommending that. And then we have this ever delightful 311
Nice card.
report, which I did try to understand and read, and I can't. It's got to be designed for a computer. It isn't designed for people, that's for sure. Anyway, what do you want to say about it, other than most of it's the same as, isn't it the same information that you just presented for
The bulk of it.
22, 23, I mean in total?
Yeah, the bulk of it is. I'll just highlight a few pages that
Okay.
are normally that I don't need a motion for or that is talked about. So the first one will be the 50% law. So which is the first 3 pages, starting at page 2. So the calculation that we presented on the budget slide is on page 4. So in the middle part under activity CSSA, that's the 50.7%.
I did see that, I can find that. Page 4.
Page 4. Yeah, so all those magical numbers gets us to that number.
Oh, but the percent number isn't here, they're just real, they're actuals, not percentages.
Yes, right here.
Oh, there it is.
In the middle part. So that's that one. And then we can go ahead and move fast forward to page 32, which is the GAN report. So the GAN report normally we would need a motion on, so we'll be putting a motion in the special board meeting on the 16th to adopt the GAN report. So basically, this is a calculation to express what is the appropriation limit that Pasadena City College is allowed to spend. So the calculated limit for us is 228 million, which is towards on the farthest right-hand column toward the middle part. And then based on the data that we have now, we are on track to stay way below that limit at only 180 million.
So where's the limit again?
So the limit is in the middle of the page, 228.
Okay, got it.
Room G.
All right. We're at 180.
Okay. And then we can also skip quickly ahead to page 45, and that is the lottery report. So for 22-23, we received 5.4 million in unrestricted lottery proceeds and 1.5 million in restricted lottery proceeds. So most of the unrestricted lottery proceeds are paid for utilities and are mostly utilities and internet services and that type of nature. And then the restricted lottery will pay for classroom supplies.
So is that included in the fawn number?
No, that is on a separate fund by itself.
Does that allow us to lower the 50/50 number?
Yes.
But that's what I meant.
Moving
That-
some
that
of the
number.
expenses on the
Out
restricted.
of, yeah.
Yeah.
50%. I'm sorry, so I was realizing I said the wrong thing. 50% number, this does not go into the instructional spending, or it does?
No, it is not.
It does not. So even though we've spent 1.5 million on classroom materials, we don't get credit for it?
Correct. Yeah.
Because it comes from lottery funds?
Yeah, because the lottery fund, the restricted portion is designed to pay for classroom supplies.
But the other piece does help.
The other piece help us, yes, it does, to help us alleviate some of those, very expensive heating bill that we all got last year. And yeah,
But it doesn't help in 50/50 one way or the other.
it helps a little bit. Yeah,
The unrestricted does.
the unrestricted does, yeah.
Because you would have to, you
You'd
could,
be paying for it.
you'd be paying, yeah,
Mhm.
out of the general fund, right?
If
Yes.
it wasn't, I see. So it's not really part of it, but the fact that it's paying things that would be part of it.
It's similar
That's
to why we
Yeah.
transfer funds to capital outlay or these
Yeah,
other
yeah,
funds versus,
okay.
and it doesn't hurt us there.
And the next piece that we talked quite a bit about is on page 47, that is the EPA.
The what?
EPA.
Oh,
EPA. So by law, we are required to spend everything that we receive on EPA revenue on instructional activities. So that whole 11 million represents salaries for classroom instructors. And we typically spend way more than that.
Just makes for really wonderful accounting, doesn't it? That you have to
Yep.
pay these teachers from this fund.
Yep, it makes things very fun. Yeah, they also added something new last year too. We were supposed to keep track of how much we spent to hire new full-time faculty members.
In terms of paying for their airfare to come and interview?
No, in terms are, because the state, part of apportionment has a little bit that has to do with the funding to hire full-time faculty members. So because it's a part of our apportionment number, it's all grouped together. But now the state is wanting us to keep track of it separately.
They want to see
That we
that
actually,
you covered that revenue source with,
with actual
so
extra.
you have to target the expenses to prove it.
Correct.
Okay, can you say that again?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Sure, yeah, so a piece of our apportionment revenue is for hiring of full-time faculty members.
I see.
Yeah, so in the past, we don't normally have to express that.
To divide it between full-time versus adjunct.
To identify who we actually hired with those dollars.
Oh, with their names? Oh,
So that whatever I saw in here, that code, that revenue code.
Right, so now we have these.
Now you gotta create it, you gotta split the expenses to say, these are the ones that we
That we
did
hired.
with this,
Yeah.
and these were ones that we just did with the other general
like,
apportionment,
do
which
you have-
is just nothing but work, right?
you have to list their names and like social security numbers and,
Yeah, we have to be able to, in the background of their paycheck is linked to where the funding source are. So in case we get asked, we'll be able to say, oh, we hire,
In an audit.
yeah.
So when you do a pre-month close, and you're assessing all this stuff, do you, or maybe you do it quarterly? There's no real way to reallocate, right? Because once it's gone through payroll, it's gone, it's cement dry. So that, you just have to assess how you're doing, and then the next quarter
And just-
compensate.
Yeah, we just have
And
to.
move more of somebody here unless there's somebody there or whatever you have to do.
Oh, so the beauty of a community college accounting is that we don't close until the end of the year.
So even though the compensation is gone and
Yes.
boom, you
Mhm.
haven't accounted for it yet, and you can,
So everything is still fluid until we do the final closing.
okay, wow,
Yeah.
all right.
But the reason why they're requiring us to do that is because somebody had a policy preference somewhere in Sacramento for community colleges to hire more full-time faculty. So that's how they hold us accountable. And it's probably our labor partners who want greater opportunities for full-time employment for our adjunct faculty. So then they created a pot of money with a string attached to ensure that we were actually, and I know that I'm sure when you think about that, well, again, it's the chess game, right? So you just, it really never, I mean, you can get around that, I guess.
It just creates accounting. In
Yeah.
the end, it's all the same, it's just accounting and extra work. But if it's fluid, you can figure things out before you put them in.
Yeah.
Or change them, I guess, once you put them in. I'm not used to a system.
I know.
I'm used to, like,
Corporate
that's
is
my
closing
biggest
every
fear is
month.
getting the payroll right,
Yep.
getting the payroll right and figuring out for the next one so that it's going where it's supposed to go, because once that goes in, it's usually locked. But that's, you got a better system for that stuff.
I wouldn't know. I wouldn't say it's a better system. That's why our closing
Different
is so
system.
long
Yeah.
versus a corporate that we can close within a couple of weeks. Our closing.
When do the books close?
So they close, the closing process starts on July 1st. And then we more typically close the second week of August.
Oh, but that's very fast.
We could be faster. 2 weeks.
That's not bad.
No, all things considered.
Yeah. Oh, I thought it was like a year because I thought it
Second
was
week of August, you're still getting vendors that haven't submitted things to you yet.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
I was on a Zoom call during COVID where they were talking about how long the state takes to close their books. And
Yeah, we're on a very meticulous, tight calendar.
kudos to you for that. That sounds pretty fast to me.
Okay, so if I can have
This is
two
a,
motions.
no, this is a draft.
Okay.
So it'll be on the official, some of these numbers could change between now and your September 16th
So this,
special meeting.
okay, so is this on agenda? No, this isn't on
No,
agenda.
this is not
For
on.
tomorrow.
Now that you
the
mention it,
11th, for
because I don't
tomorrow.
remember seeing it.
No.
Now that you-
That's why we marked it as draft, but it
Okay,
will
so
be
you
on
don't need any
agenda.
action from us?
Well, you could recommend for approval at the special board meeting.
Okay,
Both the, yeah, this, and then we'll also have the GAN limit resolution for you.
so I recommend that we approve the 311Q and the GAN limit, what is it, budget? GAN limit,
Resolution.
Get a limit resolution.
GAN limit resolution at our September 16th meeting.
Yes.
subject to minor
Yes, changes.
updates,
Mhm.
Yes.
and I'll second that. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay. Besides an adjournment, what else do you need? Let's see, was there a future agenda item thing or anything like that?
The proposed meeting
No, I
schedule.
lost my agenda and all this. I'm writing on the back of it, here it is.
Dr. Gomez made a great suggestion for us to try to go ahead and preset our budget and audit committee's meetings. So Audrey and I put our heads together and just previously we always held this meeting the week before board meeting. So it was always the Wednesday before a board meeting at a particular time. And so we mapped out the calendar for that and what that would look like. And we can always cancel a meeting if we don't need it, right?
Right.
Which is always your recommendation, Trustee Martin, but it was a
Yeah,
good
well-
suggestion, just so we're always seem to
So,
be coordinating
I think-
calendars.
I think October 11th looks
I
good to me. if
I
it's
have
good to
a 6:30 flight to the ACCT conference.
you.
Which one on the October meeting?
The October 11th.
Okay.
It's the national.
And I'm
How
guessing
about the
that
10th?
Jim would also have that flight, isn't he?
Possibly,
Is
and
it the-
Alton and Steve have gone in the
Right.
past. Oh, for budget only.
How about budget meeting
Possibly.
on the Tuesday the 10th? Instead, does
That's
that work
fine.
for everybody? Of course, the
Oh.
boss isn't here. Could
Oh,
count.
I'm sorry, that flight was the wrong way. I'm coming home on the 11th. Sorry, I misread that. So I won't be,
Here.
I'll be in the air. I'll be returning home.
So is it moving to the other
The
date,
12th.
October 12th?
Yes.
Hmm.
So we have the Jack Scott building dedication.
Yeah, we have that day, yeah.
It means everyone's gonna be here.
Yeah. And then we have the Hometown Heroes event at 6 o'clock.
I didn't know that, but yes.
Trustee Martin, does that work for you on
Well,
the
I've
12th?
I've heard about the concept,
Yes, on the
but I
12th.
just didn't know that it was on that day. But that's great.
Right, I'm already squirming because of I'm trying to get to the Jack Scott
What if we
thing,
did
and I
it
got-
right after the Jack Scott
Well,
event? Would that help?
Those 2 days I'm supposed to be in this management, I'll call it a retreat, just to simplify this conversation. Management retreat. And so, that, and there's a meeting on the 18th, that we're targeting.
So let me maybe be more helpful.
Yeah,
We actually do not have an item for the agenda for October 11th right now that is coming from the district. Unless there's something that you all need from us, we could forego the October 11th meeting
let's forego that.
and go for the November. We don't have any pressing business. Our business will be managed at the September 16th special meeting. So if that's helpful.
It's okay with you, I just soon scratch that one then.
We
The,
can do that in November.
I'm
I
gonna-
won't be at the 16th, not that
We always just do email.
Yep.
I have a standard request, I make it every time this doesn't happen, and this was budget, so I didn't really die on my sword this time.
Okay.
Because I knew we were gonna go long on this. But it's nice at every meeting to get the PARS quarterly report.
Okay.
And they should provide that to you, it just should be, if nothing else, you just gotta channel it through to us. Information only, whatever, we don't have to talk about it, it's
Okay.
just,
We could send an email on the October 11th if we have that and just say, in lieu of meeting on this date, here's the PARS report.
I would appreciate that.
Okay.
I like every quarter just getting an investment
Report.
report,
Okay,
just to see what's going down.
why don't we do that? That'll be our official. Related to the remaining Wednesdays in
Yeah.
both 2023 and 2024.
November
Can-
8th is good,
can
December
we-
6th is good.
Okay.
I think so.
And they may not be
We may
necessary
not
either.
schedule them, yep.
We don't need to meet unless there's something to meet about, and the 311Q does not
Valentine's Day.
count as something to meet about.
Yes, especially not the first
It's
one.
not the first 3.
We-
This is probably the most important 311, but it's also easier to just see the same number in the adopted budget,
Yes, okay,
in
understood.
my humble opinion.
So
December
keep
6th.
this, And then we'll just say October 11th, not scheduled.
Yeah, I think those work for me, and now you're getting into January and, you know.
This is just our roadmap, so if we ever
Yeah,
need to
it's all
adjust,
good.
we can, but at least
February
it's.
14th, what else would I do on February 14th? I want to be a budget or audit meeting.
Hello,
Of course I want to be
Your
a budget or audit meeting on February 14th.
Especially in the evening,
Yeah, until 7 o'clock.
until 7 o'clock.
Absolutely.
I say we start at 6:30, we go to 9.
You know, those Valentine dinners, they're overpriced, you know, let's just have a cup of coffee
Catered
together.
Find a place to take your wife out on Valentine's Day. We gave up on that a decade. Whatever we're doing, we're not going out on that.
Panera bread at the budget, not at
there you
meeting,
go.
that's the way we're gonna do
Throw it
it.
in place.
Okay, any other important things on, let's see, meeting schedule, proposed future agenda items, I already told you my caliper, my PARS thing, and keeping this 3-year thing going.
Got it.
Those are my 2. Let's see what happened. Okay. That brings us to adjournment, so thank you. This is really helpful for me.
I move we adjourn.
I agree. I declare we adjourn. Okay, we'll vote on it. What, you want to vote on it?
Yeah.
You want to stay in session till February 14th? If we don't vote on it, what's the alternative? Okay, I'll second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right. I think
Thank
that's
you.
crazy to vote to adjourn. What do you?
No.